We've been living in Portugal for 3 years now, and we just got back from a several-week trip in Italy, and we've had several visits to Italy in the past as well. We love Italy. Is it time to consider moving there? Let's talk about Portugal versus Italy. I'm Josh.
And I'm Kalie, and number one on the list is cost of living.
So cost of living is an interesting thing because if you go on a website like Numbeo, you're going to see that prices are fairly similar, but Italy is more expensive than Portugal. I don't know if I find that in reality actually being there.
Oh, I think it is. I think that Italy used to be known as a more affordable option in Europe and in the EU, but I think that prices have definitely risen. Now, maybe when you talk about housing, right now, obviously Portugal housing is really high, but on a day-to-day cost of living, like going out to restaurants and the costs of maybe a glass of wine or a beer or a meal, I think you can definitely tell the difference, even if you do the local food, like the local cuisine.
Right. One of the big things that I did notice with different costs would be in taxis. Taxis are so expensive in Italy compared to Portugal.
I think that's definitely something to consider because taxis or Uber, Bolt, those types of ride shares is still very, very affordable in Portugal, and it's not so much in Italy. And that goes for all different cities around Italy.
No, not at all. We actually took a taxi from our hotel, which was about a 15-20 minute ride to the train station in Turin, and it cost us 25 euros, I believe it was, or thereabouts, and we had to use cash. You remember?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Like so many places or so many taxis that we ended up having to take, we had to use cash.
Their card machine wasn't working, right?
Their card machine wasn't working. Whereas in Portugal, it's pretty easy just to book something through an app like Uber or like Bolt, and you're good to go.
It's a lot more affordable. But I would say this, that rideshare apps are a little different in Italy as well compared to in Portugal. So maybe you could book something through Uber, but an actual taxi would come because of the little fight that they have going on.
Yes.
And it might actually be more expensive through Uber as opposed if you just go through a taxi. But one thing you do have is the security of like a set rate with Uber as opposed to not knowing if your taxi driver is taking you the long way. So there's always that.
True. All right. Another specific point of cost of living would be beer and wine.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Much more expensive in Italy in terms of like percentage increase than it is to Portugal. In Portugal, you can find a beer for euro 50, €2. If you're talking about like a larger beer, maybe 3.50, upwards of 5. But then you go to Italy and it's like your starting price might be 5 and then it rises to 7 to 9 depending on where you are. Mm-hmm. And then you have the wine.
And the wine, I think in Portugal you can find something for maybe even €1.50, €2 at the starting point.
A glass.
A glass, yes, a glass, and a good pour. And then you go to Italy and I think the starting point would probably be about 4 with a less type of pour. They definitely pour less there.
Yeah. Okay. So the winner for the cost of living is pretty clear. I think the people have spoken on Numbeo, and
Portugal.
It would be Portugal.
Yes.
All right.
Next, number 2 is safety. A very important one.
Yeah. So safety, when you're looking at safety ratings globally, whether it be on a site like Numbeo, which is aggregated from people putting stuff into the database, versus the Global Peace Index, Portugal is the winner on both sides.
Numbeo would be something like, it depends on who goes on there and adds the data.
Sure.
Right? As opposed to
a deeper research being done.
Right. So those types of statistics. So, but if you look at both of those, Portugal is the clear winner there.
Yeah, I think with a site like Numbeo, you're looking more at personal safety, personal security, whereas Global Peace Index is looking also in terms of a country's geopolitical stance on things. So Portugal has had less terrorist attacks or things like that, or even involvement in geopolitical conflicts compared to Italy. So they're less at risk, if you will, for that type of thing. They stay more neutral when it comes to conflicts. But being there, feeling it, we never have to worry about pickpocketing here in Portugal. Not to say that you shouldn't be mindful of it, but it's not really a concern that I think many foreigners will tell you to watch out for. But in Italy, it is kind of a known thing.
That's the biggest one to look out for. So when we talk about safety as well, it's not necessarily violent crimes. I would say that Italy overall feels comfortable in that sense.
Definitely.
Maybe depending on what city you're in and what hour of the day it is important to take into consideration. Whereas I think in Portugal, you could be out even in Porto or Lisbon later at night, and as far as like violent crimes, you don't have to worry about that. But the biggest one to consider for safety is pickpocketing, and this is where Italy is far worse. It's more likely to happen there than it is in Portugal.
Safety.
Portugal.
2-0. Okay, so next up is food. This one is going to be contentious, especially among our Portuguese audience. So I think most people internationally know Italian food. Italian food is pretty deeply ingrained in most Americans' kind of food culture, right?
Yes. I mean, and when we think about Italian food, generally it's pasta and pizza.
Chef Boyardee and
No.
DiGiorno.
But there is a lot more to Italian food than that. But
Absolutely.
they do
Great
pasta and pizza really well.
But I would say it is different. The type of pasta that you're used to, the pasta dishes that you're used to in the US, they will taste different in Italy, for sure.
Yeah, but better. I mean, like, you go to a place that
opinion.
it's fresh, right? Especially if you go to a place where they're hand making it in front of you,
Yeah.
which is really nice. But your favorite Italian dish isn't either of those.
No.
What is it?
It's via l'ossobuco. With saffron risotto, if we want to get technical.
Okay, so you can look into that if you don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But Italian food is definitely more complex and has a lot more than just pasta and pizza. But those are also really good.
Yeah.
What about Portuguese food?
So Portuguese food has a ton of variety as well. Definitely lesser known. I would say actually Portuguese pastries might be a little, well, the pastel de nata would probably be the most famous thing that's kind of been sent abroad. A big dish or a big thing eaten here is also bacalhau, which is codfish, and it's usually, well, it's a salted, preserved fish that is like rehydrated and then made into a variety of dishes. There's also fresh seafood. There's pork. You can have
well, the pastries. I mean, if you want to talk about the dessert side, although Italy does have good desserts as well, but I mean, like Portugal knows how to do their pastries. I would say this: a lot of them are egg-based, right?
Yes. So if you
because
have an allergy.
because of their history. So there is that to consider, but they do pastries really well.
I also want to say with Portuguese food, like a pretty standard meal experience in a Portuguese restaurant would be going in and having some sort of meat with a rice, with a potato, and with bread served.
And maybe an itty-bitty salad.
And a small salad
or
of
just lettuce.
maybe some sliced onion.
And tomato.
A little bit of vinegar and olive oil.
Yeah, it's
something
a bit
like
of an
that.
afterthought, but it's there.
It's there. So those are your veggies.
Yeah.
There are vegetable dishes in Portugal, but if you're talking about like the average experience going to a restaurant and just kind of choosing thing at random off the menu, that's probably what your dish is going to look like.
Yeah, and maybe soup as a starter. That's big, yeah, like a vegetable soup. Okay.
Whereas in Italy,
yeah. Oh gosh, you've got the different.
You've got the antipasti, the primeri platti, the secondi platti, the dessert.
And
as
I
well.
don't know who eats all of that.
Who does
food.
eat all that?
It's a lot of food. So
If
don't
you eat
feel like
all
you
that
have to.
food in Italy, comment in the comment
Yeah.
section. How do you do it?
Yeah.
Okay, so this one's not difficult for me. However, I think it'd be difficult for some people, but the clear winner is Italy.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know if we would differ on that one.
I love Italian food. Love Italian food. Okay, next up, number 4, let's talk about the cities and just kind of the depth of options that we have comparing Portugal and Italy.
Yes. So, I mean, in Portugal, you have Lisbon as the capital, Rome being the capital of Italy. Very different cities, size-wise for sure.
Yeah.
Probably also as far as like tourism and how well known they are. I mean, Rome has just been on the map for how long?
Yeah.
A really long time.
They both have their history, and certainly natives will fight for kind of that history.
So those are the capitals, and then if you go to like maybe the second largest city in Portugal, it would be Porto, whereas in Italy you have a lot of options that are quite close in how big they are. So once we start scaling down size-wise, Italy has way more big cities than Portugal does.
Yeah, I think that what you see is in Italy, you have a wide variety of cities and like larger cities that will be full of amenities and options and things available to you, whether it's art, culture, sports, whatever it is. Portugal, the scale drops quite a bit. Now, if you're the type of person that wants a city, then you might want to lean towards Italy. in this fact. But if you're a person that wants like the village or town life, you have that in both.
You do have that in both. Yeah, they'll have a bit of a different feel, but you definitely have that in both. But you would be lacking the city part in Portugal once you start dropping into maybe the fifth or sixth largest city of Portugal compared to Italy. Every region has big cities in them with the amenities, like you said. So it depends on what you're looking for as far as cities, but I think Italy has the bigger options. Maybe we're the same on this one.
Yeah.
The winner for this is
Italy.
Next, let's move on to language.
Yeah, so with language, it's very interesting because we're looking at this from kind of two ways and both with English speakers in mind, okay? So our audience is English speakers, we're speaking in English. So we need to look at how does an English speaker adapt to Portuguese and Italian, and then also how English friendly are these countries as you're trying to adapt to their language.
That's good, and that might tilt the vote one way or the other.
As far
as language goes, like the actual language, so talking about the Portuguese language and Italian language, I think they're quite comparable in how easy or difficult they are. You know, it depends on the learner for sure.
Quite comparable.
But the base is the same.
Latin.
Yes, so I think that as far as learning the language, it would be quite similar.
Yeah, learning it from like a textbook for sure. Speaking it on the street, I think it would be a bit different because the pronunciation in Portugal is notoriously more difficult. I think Italian, because of kind of the rhythm and the cadence, always staying the same. I think because of that, Italian is easier.
Okay. And then what about actual use out on the street? If you're trying to learn Italian and then you're using that out on the street compared to if you're learning Portuguese and using that out on the street, like which do you think is easier?
They're pretty similar. I think where Portuguese gets the win is actually among the people because Portuguese people are super patient when it comes to people trying to speak their language. And they're also accommodating. So if they see that you're struggling or hear that you're struggling, they'll switch to English.
Right, which maybe you don't get that as much in Italy.
I don't think so.
But I think also, too, that's touching on a point that we'll come to about the friendliness of the people. But what about the locals speaking English and how well that goes?
Yeah, so statistically, Portuguese would have the advantage over Italians when it comes to the amount of people in Portugal and their level of fluency. They're one of the highest in the world. Okay, in saying that, we didn't have very many difficulties at all speaking in English when we were in Italy.
Right, in a lot of places. So that wasn't hard. So theirs, I think, maybe has risen as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So
okay, so let's vote. Yeah? Portugal? Okay, let's move on to culture and society, which I already kind of hinted at when we were talking about the cities. But looking at culture, especially from an American perspective, I think Italian just has a much deeper, like richer history that will be relevant to Americans. In saying that, Portugal has a ton of history. It's a fascinating country when it comes to that. History buffs, whether you're in Portugal or Italy, you're going to really enjoy it.
Very much so. And I think what is difficult, though, is because we learn a lot more of Italian history or things from that era. When you go to a place like Florence, you know what to see, what you're looking at. Whereas if you go to a lesser known or a smaller city or town, no, in Portugal, there's history there, but you might not know what you're looking at or you might not know the history of it. So that's tricky because they both have their deep historical roots, but I think we just know more about Italy overall.
Yeah, for sure. You said Florence, I had Venice on my mind. I think with this, if we're looking at like art and culture and that type of thing, then maybe it edges towards Italy, right? But it can't just be that in this section because there's also a societal component that's there. First, it's talking about like the family kind of nucleus. Both countries are fantastic at having like strong families and this connection, intergenerational relationships happening. That dynamic is great. It's very easy to go out with a kid, no matter what the age is, young, old, doesn't matter. So in that regard, it's really good. I do think that Portuguese people over the whole are friendlier than Italians. I think Portuguese are a little warmer and kind of like more humble in a really good way, compared to Italians being a bit more
Abrasive?
yeah, that's okay.
Blunt? I don't know, just a bit
Bombastic.
more. Yeah, I
No,
definitely
not
agree with that.
bombastic, but you know what I mean.
And we kind of touched on that when we were speaking about language with the friendliness, the overall friendliness. And of course, this is like a generalization, but the overall friendliness of Portuguese compared to Italians, I think Portuguese definitely has the win there. So this is a tough one.
Okay, so
because you've got the culture, they both have history, their culture, their societies, they both are very centered around family. Maybe Portuguese are a little friendlier overall. What do you think?
all right, 3, 2, 1.
Portugal.
Okay, next up, let's talk about healthcare. All right, we have far more experience with Portuguese healthcare than we do Italian healthcare. In terms of functionality, there are problems within the Portuguese healthcare system. Sometimes it gets overloaded.
The public
system gets overloaded, but the same thing happens in Italy.
Right.
We saw similar problems, maybe worse in Italy when it came to COVID-19. Not just the infection rate, but I mean hospitals filling up and the struggle with demand there. But it could have been because it hit worse in Italy than it did in Portugal.
And earlier too.
And earlier,
so just
they didn't know what.
How to prepare.
We didn't know what to do with it. Okay, so.
But overall, like Josh was saying, I mean, we have experience in the public and private in Portugal, but not in actual personal experience in Italy. We just what we see, what we read. But if we go to statistics and we look at what is being said about the different healthcare systems, I think because of that, Italy
with the win. Okay, 8. Infrastructure. This one is an important one because in infrastructure we're looking at like the quality of building, roads, airports, water, like safe water,
drinking water,
that type of stuff.
You think about roads in Italy. They've known how to do roads for quite a while, haven't they?
It's funny.
But infrastructure wise, I think because there are larger cities in Italy, they have maybe renovated and built up and restored a lot more than what's happened in Portugal.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one because you essentially have a country in Portugal which has a low GDP. Some people would classify Portugal as a poor country. We've even seen people call Portugal third world. It's not
crazy.
it's not our experience at all. Granted, we live in Porto, second biggest city, but we have traveled like all around the country.
In some of the smaller towns and cities, so.
Yeah, we don't find the infrastructure to be third world at all. We visited some third world countries in our travels. We've traveled to over 90 countries at this point. So like we have seen like that side of developing countries. Portugal's has very modern aspects to it in terms of infrastructure for sure. There are other aspects that are, let's say, behind. But just looking at infrastructure, I think Portugal is very good. The water's safe here. The water's safe in Italy. Roads similar. I think the Portuguese bus network is better, but the Italian network, because the country's bigger.
Trains. The Italian.
Yeah, the train network
better.
is bigger.
Yeah.
So there's more variety. Get you to more places. Portugal, it tends to be just really on the coast, up and down the coast.
Yeah,
and then
in Algarve you have the west to east one, but it's just one, right?
But trains tend to be more on time unless there's a strike in Portugal. Trains tend to be more on time here.
I don't know. They were quite efficient and on time in Italy.
This trip.
This trip, that's true.
We've had some bad experiences with trains in Italy.
But we've also had bad experiences in Portugal because of the strikes. Which could come at any time. And you don't know your train is canceled until you get there.
Okay.
So they both have issues there.
Yeah, they do. All right, so vote?
Yep. Italy.
Italy?
Yep, I say Italy.
Okay. I think maybe just the wealth. They've got a little more money to throw at infrastructure. Next up, quality of life. Based on quality of life indexes, Portugal is better. Portugal has better air quality as well, which affects quality of life. Compared to Italy. And I mean, it's ranking like 20 positions higher when it comes to global quality of life, global pollution.
Yeah, because the north of Italy can get really bad with pollution and air quality.
And we experienced that. Like we experienced kind of some not just difficulty breathing. It wasn't difficulty breathing, but you could feel it when you're breathing. You could taste it when you're breathing. Haven't really experienced that here in Portugal. I'm sure there are some places you could go.
The only time I think you really get that is when there are fires, when fires happen a bit more in the interior, if you're closer to those, or if the wind blows it closer to the coast, which isn't super common but could happen, then it could affect the air quality. But that is kind of situational. You know, I mean, I guess the others are as well because of the factory stuff, but that's something that's like long term. This is like a fire happens and then it causes the pollution, the bad air quality. But what's happening in the north has a lot to do with factories and such. So that's kind of a long-term thing.
Yeah, it is. Quality of life is a tricky one as well, because when you're looking at an index, the index often is really set to kind of the local standard quality of life. Whereas when you're talking about a foreigner, especially like a foreigner that's making more money than a local or having more economic resources, then the quality of life dynamic shifts, right?
Sure, yeah.
So I would say it pushes it even further in the direction of Portugal, because your money goes further here in Portugal versus in Italy. Your options in terms of geography, it also is probably better here than in Italy.
Okay.
Your days of sunshine, the societal stuff that we talked about, so kind of all of that put together, the winner is Portugal.
Moving on, number 10 is climate and weather. An important one, I think, for a lot of people, because some people are trying to escape the snow or the cold, or they're actually trying to get away from the heat. So depending on what you're looking for, you do have a variety in both.
Yeah.
Probably more of a variety in Italy, right? Because when you get up to the really northern parts, you do get snow up there.
If we're looking at like the climate classification, most of the regions in both of these countries fall into the Mediterranean climate classification. And when I say Mediterranean in Portugal, I know that there's the Atlantic coast. It's the climate index.
It's the name for it.
It's the name for it.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay?
We're not saying we're in the Mediterranean.
So both of them fall into that category. But I think, like you said, there's big variety when it comes to both places. And Portugal being so small and having all this variety is pretty remarkable. You can have snow in the winter. You can also have that in Italy.
Right.
I think Italy's got a bit more variety because it is bigger.
Longer, right? I mean, this covers more like north to south.
Yeah, I think statistically, if we're looking at like warmer weather, you're going to find more warm weather spots in Portugal versus Italy. So if that's something that you're looking for. So if you're wanting more cold, Italy will have it. If you're wanting more warm, Portugal will have it.
Yeah, both quite temperate though in a lot of the cities, and a lot of coast too. But that's something to consider. So you've got Portugal, who most, is the Atlantic, right? In Italy, most is the Mediterranean. So as far as water goes, I think that water wins for Italy because it's much warmer, right? So if you want to get into
the warmer water temperature
of the water, so if you want to actually get into the water, it's really difficult. It's cold in Portugal because of the Atlantic, as opposed to warmer and calmer water that happens in more places of Italy. So beach stuff to consider.
So would you say overall that Italy's the winner?
I don't know.
Portugal. I think I'm going to go with Portugal.
Okay. You're saying Portugal?
Yeah.
Overall?
Overall.
Weather? Okay. Portugal.
11, this is a very important one that you need to take into consideration before moving to a place. Like, don't think about this after moving, and that's tax obligations.
It's not a fun one to talk about, but it is important.
That's why we left it to the end.
It is important to set things up right so that you can minimize your tax obligation in whatever country you choose.
What we see is that we both have progressive scales, and we both have a range that goes in Italy from 23%, which is fairly high, 23% up to 43% as being the highest. In Portugal, the scale starts a bit lower at 14.5%, but then rises above the Italian scale at 48%.
Right.
Now, here's the interesting thing, is at the top end, which is where a lot of Americans that are moving with jobs will be, maybe not American retirees, but Americans with jobs will be moving their jobs that they're earning, I would assume, $50K or more.
So if you make 50,000 a year or more, then you're going to be in the 43 percentile. Obviously, again, generalization because it depends on how you structure things.
Correct.
Which is why it's good to speak with a financial advisor beforehand. But generally speaking, if it's 50K or more, then you're at 43%.
Yeah.
Whereas in Portugal,
this is the interesting thing. Over 40K, and you're at 45% on the progressive scale.
so a lower amount yearly puts you above the highest
in
that
Italy.
is.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider.
Yeah, and we're talking about the difference between 43 and 48. Both to me are high.
It's high taxes, so that's something to definitely consider. It's a bit of a bummer, but something you need to know before you choose.
Yeah, and check out if either country has a tax scheme that might work for you. But just looking at what we can see kind of on their scales, the clear winner is Italy.
The results are in, and Portugal is the winner. It's close, but Portugal is the winner.
Now, if Portugal is the winner for you, you need to check out this video right here on the top 12 cities to live in 2024. And if you can't get enough of Italy, check out our podcast here where we visit different places and tell you if we'd expat that. Now, let's get moving.
Bye.
Bye.